Emily, I'm sorry. I must have a key. Where are you, please? I'm pressing the phone.
So if you want, you can just, it's only one slide. So you can just use it. You want to export this, copy and paste. This is just to have a background. Maybe like as people, as like
Together a climate team. So it's under the okay. Yes, how long are you there for?
here, Chris.
Welcome everyone. Just one point, because we have some speakers virtual also, so you need to use your headphones to listen to them. Okay, welcome to this event, Accelerating Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Adaptation Through Innovative Financing. Ecosystem-based adaptation is a well-proven and well-recognized example of nature-based solutions for climate adaptation. And since it was coined in 2009 and working with our champion donor Iucn, BMU Iucn, it's been now proven all over the world that how nature, biodiversity, element of that, human resilience and ecosystems can work together for enhancing community resilience. And today is a world where, half the world is burning, wildfires, half the world is in flooding. So even if we do mitigation today, all greenhouses gas limit, it will still take more than 100 years coming back to the same economy, same well-being of the humans and all this, which was maybe 50 years ago, and all those elements are so challenging. So EBA could be a very well, it's a proven approach which can lead towards enhancing human resilience. But at the same time, if we look at it, nature-based solutions and all those are still marginalized. We are talking a lot about it, but still required funding is not going into it. Together, if we look at all the climate financing world, a recent report tells us that only 5% goes into adaptation. And out of that 5%, only 1.4 goes into nature-based solutions and EBA related aspects. And we are very happy today that we have champion from Iucn, who is providing support since the beginning on EBA and other. So, for to start the proceedings, I would like to first welcome Mr. Ambassador Tung Uk from the Ministry of Environment, Foreign Affairs, Republic of Korea, and he will do the welcome remarks. And Ambassador has a proven experience at as being a professor emeritus at Seoul National University and has done a lot of work in climate-related issues. So first, I will welcome Dr. Kung.
Good morning, all. Welcome to this nature. Okay, good morning, all. My special thanks go to the Iucn Union for taking this initiative to raise the visibility of nature-based solutions as a way to mitigate climate change and restore biodiversity on a global level. And Korean people traditionally used to have a very good reference to the harmony between man and the universe and the nature. If you see this Korean flag, that's that philosophical symbol of that harmony. And so, we used to have very strict regulation on nature conservation traditionally, and if you go to the culture side, that you could see that some monument in every village until last century. That said, what that says is that 80 lessons for dumping waste and 100 lessons for loosening cattle, destroying the forest and farmland like that. And just about 600 years ago, Joseon dynasty was established, and it lasted 500 years. And at that time, they also enacted a law, a constitution, specifying that a penalty for environmental crimes like that. So every mountain around Seoul City was designated Forbidden Mountain, and on other important mountains also. And illegal logging of one pine tree was punished with 100 lashes. And the penalty for 10 pine trees was 100 lashes plus deportation to Manchuria like that. And at that time, just 100 lashes meant almost a death penalty. But 100 years ago, Japan invaded Korea and colonized our peninsula, and they began to plant our forest like that. And my hometown is Busan City, and my elder brother testified that all Busan harbor was covered with timbers shipped to Japan. And after liberated from Japan, our mountains were like that. It's almost a desert like that. And we launched the regreening campaign in 1960s and 50s, and you see that. And I was one of them. I went up to the mountain every year just to plant trees like that. And now all the mountains are green like this. No, you can't find any bold mountains in Korea. Korea is 70% mountains. And when the forests are restored, that we could see the animals which thought to be extinct, even, but now they are appearing like this. And we applied that experience in Mongolian desert, and that gentleman is me, and my beautiful wife is there. And this was the beginning. And now, just it became like this. You see, it's a big difference, big difference. And these, fruits are commercially sold now. It was made juice and the fruit syrup. And so now globally, the deforestation accounts for about the 25% of global emission, greenhouse gas emission. But the developing countries are forced to cut down the trees of the mountains and the forest to supply for energy and for farming for food. So in that case, the Korea's experience can be very helpful for those countries. Now, you know that animals and plants are disappearing very rapidly. And the scientists say that the extinction rate is 1,000 times those of the dinosaur. So, but the main reason is, one of the main reasons are the deforestation. So I really appreciate the Iucn's effort to pursue the sustainable future through the nature conservation. And this coronavirus is terrible now. The coronavirus gave us a very good lesson. Until now, 5 million people already died from this disease, and in Korea alone, more than 3,000 people are dying from this. But this coronavirus is one of those zoonosis. We have been about 80 zoonosis since last half century. AIDS, SARS, MERS, and bird flu, and mad cow disease. Those are zoonosis. You know that. And those zoonosis are the result of the destroying the deep ecosystem aided by the climate change. So we have to go back to the nature to make our planet greener and healthier. I thank you very much, for opening this session, and many thanks go to all of you and the panelists also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kum. Now I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Behrens. Dr. Behrens has worked for the Ministry of Environment, BMU Iucn, for 13 years. He started his ministerial career in the Climate Division and since worked in various national, European, and international areas. Before taking over Iucn in 2019, the law graduate with a doctorate in public international law headed the Ministerial Cabinet Division unit for 5 years. So, Philip, over to you for keynote speech.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. Dear Ambassador, thanks a lot for this impressive introduction of your achievements in Korea with regard to afforestation, but also very interested to hear about the legislation 500 years ago. Really impressive. Thank you very much for that. Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the International Climate Initiative, the Iucn. The Iucn is the BMU, the German Ministry for the Environment's most important instrument for funding international climate and biodiversity projects. And it's a great pleasure for me to join the dialogue today on the important topic of accelerating nature-based solutions for climate adaptation through innovative financing. I think the importance of adaptation to climate change action can hardly be overstated. Estimates from the Adaptation Gap report show that adaptation costs in developing countries alone amount to approximately $70 billion per year. These costs are estimated to increase up to $300 billion by 2030 and even $500 million by 2050. A study by the Deloitte Economics Institutes indicates that without climate change, for Germany alone, climate change-induced losses could amount to 730 billion euros over the next 50 years. I think that we all know those impressive figures, but sometimes it is really necessary to repeat them all and all again, because it shows and underlines the dimension of the task we are talking about. While those costs of adaptation are increasing, financing for adaptation is not increasing fast enough. As a result, the adaptation finance gap remains and might even grow. Ecosystem-based adaptation, or nature-based solutions for adaptation, are key thematic priorities within the International Climate Initiative, the IUCN. Since our beginning in 2008, it was our aim to support EBA action from pilot projects and knowledge generation to upscaling and mainstreaming. We are pleased and also a bit proud that IUCN has contributed to the establishment of EBA as a widely acknowledged approach for adapting to these impacts of climate change. Since 2008, IUCN has funded over 60 EBA projects with a total funding volume of more than 350 million euros. These 28 bilateral, 21 regional and 12 global projects support the recovery and protection of ecosystems. One of these global projects is the support of the Friends of EBA. FIBA brings together practitioners, researchers and experts, providing a space for exchange to share knowledge and learn lessons on EBA. And looking at the complexity of climate action and adaptation activities, we all know that proper knowledge management is key. Through its working groups, FIBA contributes to advances in both theory and implementation of EBA, and we are glad to cooperate with such a diverse network of partners. Now, to further upscale EBA, it needs two things. First, it needs to be integrated into national planning. And second, we need new and innovative sources of finance to meet the needs and close the adaptation finance gap. This is one of the reasons why IUCN decided to establish the Global EBA Fund together with our strong partners Iucn and UNEP in 2019. The Global EBA Fund is a fast start support mechanism for innovative approaches to EBA. The fund incentivizes innovative finance mechanisms and private sector EBA investment. It has already had an overwhelming response, having received nearly 1,000 applications since the opening on the first call in March 21. At the same time, these numbers illustrate once more how urgent and high the demand for adaptation finance and access to innovative finance mechanisms still is. At the IUCN, we see this demand as a sign that the Global EBA Fund has come at the right time, and we plan even to intensify our support of the Global EBA Fund and the cooperation with UNEP and Iucn to be able to respond to as many applications as possible. Beyond this Global EBA Fund, the IUCN has a range of instruments to meet different needs. First, there are our big calls. We have so-called thematic calls and country calls, and with those calls we are looking for large-scale projects of a size from 15 to 20 million euros, and normally a duration of up to 8 years. And next to that, recently we introduced 2 small-scale programs because we wanted to reach out for new partners and increase the diversity of our partners and be able to try out new ideas. This is once the IUCN medium grants and the IUCN small grants. Medium grants is focusing on in Germany based NGO projects with a size of up to 800,000 euros, and the small grants is looking for NGO projects from local NGOs and regional NGOs in ODA countries, and those projects have a size of up to 200,000 euros. Beyond this public funding, such as that provided by the Iucn, we also need to put even more effort in convincing the private sector that investments in innovative adaptation measures deliver not just socio-ecological, but also economic benefits. To better engage the private sector, attract additional finance and convince decision makers, we have to provide information and robust figures on the cost efficiency of EBA measures. Involving stakeholders of the private sector is becoming more and more important. I think it's worldwide, but also within the Iucn. In particular, we are already gathering important evidence through quite a few Iucn projects. For example, projects in the tourism sector in Mexico, or the insurance and finance sectors in the Philippines, as well as the food and agricultural sector in South America. To enable upscaling, it is important that the right elements are in place. And for that, specifically, we need incentives, investments, and the right information. First, it's important to establish or strengthen policy and legal frameworks that can incentivize progress on EBA. Second, it is essential to mobilize investments to enable the upscaling of projects, including by leveraging funds from public and private actors. And third, to enable the upscaling of projects, it's important to use all available information, particularly, of course, scientific knowledge. Iucn projects already contribute to upscaling by addressing research gaps, building local capacities, piloting innovative approaches, engaging in strategic policy mainstreaming, and incentivizing innovative finance mechanisms to upscale EBA on a local, regional, and global level. While we need more adaptation finance overall, getting adaptation finance right is not just about how much finance is available, it's also about what we finance. And that is why at the Iucn we are looking to finance transformative projects that contribute to both ambitious climate and biodiversity goals. We also need to make sure that the available finance matters to those who benefit from it. For this, we need to listen to our partners in the respective countries, be it on the ministerial level or local communities. And we need to involve them in the project design. That's why at the Iucn, many of our projects use participatory, community-based adaptation approach. And this is why I'm especially excited to hear and learn about the experiences and perspectives of today's panelists. As always at the Iucn, we are very eager to listen to others and learn from their experiences. So finally, let me thank you very much, Iucn and FIBA, not only for organizing this event, but for all you're doing, all the work you are organizing around this very important topic of EBA. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Philip, for your remarks. And it's great to see that, adaptation through nature-based solutions is working, and it's, showing evidence, and that's why there's more funding coming in, which is so much needed. And we will very much appreciate, Philip, if you could be part of the panel also. So for the panel discussion, I will hand over to our Director of Center for Economy and Finance at Iucn, Chris Buss. So over to you, Chris Buss.
Okay, thank you, Ali, and thank you for the opening speeches. Full of very impressive information and details. Let me just take my mask off. We have 5 panelists. 2 of us now. Philip's joining. Will be up front. So Natalie, would you like to like to come up the front. Natalie is the founder and managing director of For Climate and senior advisor to the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility. So welcome to come and join us. And Philippe, if you'd like to come and join as well. And online we also have Christina Romilly, Program Officer from the World Health Organization. If you could wave, I think we don't have you on camera, Christina, but we can see you there. And we also have Beatrice Merino, the Director for Development Finance Institutions at the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for waving. Also Karina Barrera, the Undersecretary of Climate Change for the Ministry of Environment, Water and Ecological Transition of Ecuador. And that's our panel. So thank you very much and welcome. So I'm going to give each panelist a chance to give their perspective on innovative finance in relation to climate adaptation. If Natalie, I think I'll start on the screen, and so we get everyone interactive straight away. So Beatrice, if I can hand over to you for your initial intervention, and then we'll go through a round of questions with the panelists, and then open to the floor for some further discussion over the course of the next hour, before then closing in about an hour and 10 minutes time.
Thank you very much, and thanks for putting together this panel. I think that a lot has been said about the need and the benefits of nature-based solutions for adaptation. So I would like maybe to mention a few examples of how TNC is trying to develop these innovative finance mechanisms for NBS for adaptation, which usually come with benefits for mitigation and local communities, economy, and nature and biodiversity as well. I think that, in terms of restoring coastal ecosystems such as coral reefs, I think that is well known. The reef insurance in Mexico, in the state of Quintana Roo, where TNC work with the state government, with the insurance sector, with the tourism industry to ensure the coral reef against hurricane damage. I think that it's important to know that, that insurance mechanism is not only important to protect the coral reef, but actually it's very important as well to preserve the economic viability of the region, which lies within the tourism sector and the tourism industry. We are replicating this coral reef insurance model, and actually with support from the Global Fund for Coral Reef, we are going to replicate it in the Bahamas. And actually, we are happy to see that other partners and stakeholders are replicating coral reef insurance globally, for example, in Central America or in Asia and the Pacific, in particular with support of the Iucn. So we have insurance. Another innovative financing mechanism for adaptation would be the development of what we call blue carbon credit and resilience credit. And we are piloting and testing and developing these credits in 12 countries. These are verifiable credits that quantify not only the mitigation value of coastal wetlands and mangroves and seagrasses protection or restoration efforts, but also consider the adaptation value to the coastal community. Of course, one needs to create a market for those credits, which is something that, it will define whether that is a solution that is viable at scale. We certainly will be trying that, given that we have developed markets for credits in other places for other adaptation purposes. For example, we can develop a market for stormwater retention credits in Washington, DC. So markets can be created where we have the policy, the regulatory, and the capital that is needed to do so. Other innovative mechanisms is working with hydropower plants for water utilities, that we are doing now to try to show that there is a case for them to invest in nature-based solutions for water sedimentation, water flow regulation control, which does not only offer adaptation benefits, but it also delivers an increase and improve operations and efficiency for these corporates. And of course, today I wouldn't let it pass my intervention without mentioning the blue bond for ocean conservation in Belize, that the TNC alongside the government of Belize, Credit Suisse, congratulations Marisa on the call, and the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation are announcing today. That is a mechanism that actually uses financial tools that we already know exist in the markets, like debt swap, debt restructuring, access to capital market finance, to put it together in a creative way so that we can not only provide some debt relief to the government of Belize, but also a cash flow, an annual cash flow of funding sources to implement in their ocean conservation and adaptation program. So I will leave it at that. I think that we have insurance, we have credit subsets and developing markets for this credit. We have pay for success models, we have debt swaps, we have capital markets, we have blended finance, risk, political risk, insurance. So I think that there are plenty of innovative financing mechanisms that are showing that they can work and that there is a potential to scale.
Thank you very much, Patrice. A wide range of work that TNC are doing there, and I think it's pertinent to this subject about accelerating. You're seeing these things that are working, and it's great now. Perhaps that's part of the discussion and challenge that we have about how do we accelerate that. I'd like to also go to Marisa. Marisa, sorry, I think I missed you on my introduction. I was confused between my list and the screen and trying to do two things at once, and I'm not great with modern technology, so apologies. But perhaps if you could introduce yourself and then also give your 3 minutes.
Sure. So hello, everyone. A real pleasure to be here, and thanks to all of you. It's inspirational to hear all the good work that my fellow peers are doing in this space. So my name is Marisa Drew, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer and head of a group at Credit Suisse we call Sustainability Strategy, Advisory, and Finance. And at our core, we believe our mission, our sort of North Star guiding light, is to mobilize capital to help solve some of the world's biggest challenges. And in this area of natural capital and nature-based solutions, we are spending quite a bit of time focusing on oceans. We believe that the oceans are very, very underinvested from a private capital point of view, despite their criticality to human and planetary health. So this is a place where we have spent quite a bit of time both to try to assess the landscape, to determine why it is that there has been a dearth of private capital. And what we find when we pull some of the largest pools of capital, so those are asset managers that are looking to invest, but they don't know how. The real answer most of the time is that structures that are missing, that speak to their needs as investors. And that's a place where we believe that we can participate with partners to deliver some of those investment opportunities. So we already got a little bit of a preview of our big announcement today, but we are absolutely delighted to have announced just a few short hours ago the closing of the largest blue bond for marine conservation that has ever been done. And that has been done in great partnership with the Nature Conservancy. But it's a beautiful example, I believe, of bringing a variety of different actors together in the same structure. So the way this financing works is that we have worked with the government of Belize to both restructure its debts, but as part of the restructuring, there is an endowment where a portion of the bond proceeds will be put into this endowment and earmarked for marine conservation. And we believe this is wonderful because Belize is very, very focused on tourism. And as we all know, tourists these days are focused on going to the places where they can genuinely believe that those places that they're patronizing are aware of the natural environment. And so this is a wonderful virtuous circle. So as we protect more of Belize's ecosystem, more tourists come, delivering more dollars, which fuels the economy. And so in this particular structure, we underwrote a $364 million bond, which will be then on-lent through a structure with the TNC to effectively restructure the debt. So pushing out maturities and making the debt stack more affordable for the country, but also, again, earmarking funds for conservation. And as part of this overall structure, we also received a credit support from the DFC, so the development arm of the US government, which has also been extremely helpful because their support has taken off some of the country risk for investors, which means that the types of investors that are participating in our structure will be long-term insurance companies, pension funds, who are very much focused on conservation, but also quality of credit. So beautiful example of blended finance where you have a for-profit institution like Credit Suisse, you have for-profit investors, you have a non-profit conservation organization, you have a development funder, and you have a government all in the same structure. So very complicated bringing all these parties together, but I think we're very much all mission aligned. That North Star for us was about the conservation outcomes. At the same time, we were providing an opportunity for the country to have a manageable debt stack. So this is something that we're very pleased and we hope provides a little bit of a roadmap for future transactions and other countries to participate. So I will leave it at that. But again, very delighted to be here and talk about this really big breakthrough in marine conservation.
Thank you, Marissa, and congratulations on the launch of the Blue Bond with TNC. It sounds amazingly interesting, and hopefully we can get into a little bit more depth in some of the discussions to learn how that's working. So now I'd like to hand over to Karina from the FIBA. So Karina, you'll have your 3 minutes. We can't see you. No? Okay, we'll move on. So Natalie, perhaps I can hand over to you and we can do it in presence while we're not relying on technology.
Yes, hello. My name is Natalie Ross for Climate. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility that Iucn has set up already 3 years ago. First of all, I want to thank Iucn for giving us opportunities to speak today, and also for Korea for hosting this event. I'm very happy to speak about a specific area of nature-based solutions, and these are nature-based solutions in the coastal zones. We have heard today that we need new solutions to finance these nature-based solutions, to move away from the typical traditional way of financing from donor grants, public budgets, to really tap the investment market, the capital markets, to mobilize more funding. We have heard that we need to integrate the nature-based solution into national planning and mobilize the private sector, and I would like to give an example of what we have done on behalf of Iucn with the initial funding of Luxembourg government and also the support of the Swedish government by establishing the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, which is a facility to really help local projects to get ready for being investable by impact funds, to be integrated into the portfolios of blue bonds, for example, and really make them ready for the asset managers to become interesting and to get involved. And this really circles around really showing the business models behind some of the nature-based solutions, how they can generate revenues, how they can be profitable enough for the different types of investors to pick up. And this is really a key issue because normally local projects, also often managed by NGOs, don't now know how to really develop in a way where they become interesting for the wider investment market and asset managers. And here we really help the project on the project level. We really help with grants to make the different revenue streams visible, to help them with feasibility studies, technical studies, to really reduce the risk that many of the more commercial investors perceive that these projects have. It's all about risk reduction. And also showing that this project can generate the revenue streams that are required, but also really make the impacts visible, because many of these investors are also impact funds, and showing the impacts for adaptation, climate mitigation and biodiversity are key. In that sense, the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility has already developed a positive impact model. We also have developed blueprints which you can download from the website of the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility under bluenaturalcapital.org. On these blueprints you really see the different types of project we have supported so far. It's MPA under private management, it's sustainable aquaculture, sustainable seaweed production. These are also projects involving the sale of carbon credits. So you see on each blueprint what is the business model behind, what is the investment structure behind, so that they can pick up and scaled. We also developed a blue bond guide already in 2019. We have heard from the different panelists now this innovative TNC and Credit Suisse facilitated blue bond in Belize, but blue bonds have already had a certain pickup over the past years with the Seychelles blue bond, the China blue bond, the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, having issued blue bonds now 2 months ago, and the guide we have developed under the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, we are proud to say that it has also been picked up by the Asian Development Bank as a reference guide for sovereign entities wishing to develop blue bonds. So we really see the bond market as an important pillar to mobilize financing for adaptation, also adaptation in the coastal zones, because this is a language that large investors know. They know the categories, how blue bonds, how green bonds, how sustainable bonds work. We have frameworks, we have standards. So it's all about integrating the blue, especially in my case, because I'm working on coastal solutions, integrating these coastal solutions in the language of the blue bond investors. This is what we are trying also with the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility. I really stop here. We can, because there are many more speakers to come.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and as well as I look forward to some good discussions with Marissa and Beatrice on blue bonds and the challenges and opportunities there. But also, I've done some work with the Coalition for Private Investment and Conservation and their blueprints. So it's also interesting to hear that you've got the blueprints that have been developed around marine protected areas and the seaweed and the opportunities they present as investment opportunities. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to hand over to Christina. Christina, you come from the World Health Organization, so a slightly different perspective for everyone else. So it'd be interesting to hear from you for the next 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, and I really do want to make a point of thanking the organizers for the vision and opportunity to bring in a non-traditional partner to join this this really impressive group of speakers and panelists, and to say a few words on behalf of WHO's Environment, Climate and Health Department, where I am based. Full disclosure, I am not a finance expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been working for quite some time at the intersection of climate, biodiversity loss, and human health for a couple of decades. So it really is a pleasure to be here and to join my voice. I really think that this dialogue is exceptionally timely, because our success as a global community in tackling these intertwined crises that we're facing, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the health crisis, absolutely hinges on, establishing strategic partnerships at the local, national, regional level, and of course at the global level, to design, finance, and implement policies, plans, programs that are indeed coordinated, coherent, and well aligned. So I really just want to begin by emphasizing the very real sense of urgency of moving in this direction, not as an essential precondition for success, for achieving individual goals, but in achieving our collective goals, including the Paris Agreement, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals moving forward. There's no question that the COVID-19 pandemic, which has, as we know, disrupted and shaken the very fabric of our social, economic, and health systems the world over, is a perfect example of the systemic failure so far to make the connection between the natural world, how that impacts our climate, and how they are modulated by our socioeconomic and financial structures. We all know that these structures do require those strategic partnerships to which I referred a moment ago. And we've heard some brilliant and inspiring examples that are emerging from fellow co-panelists. But I want to be a little bit polemic and say, now is really not the time to simply sit back and congratulate each other to say how far we've come in establishing these partnerships and financial mechanisms, but really should be an opportunity to strengthen the tools and finance mechanisms that we do have, certainly through inspiration by examples such as these. And it's really my great hope that this dialogue is about moving beyond how we finance climate adaptation and mitigation on the one hand, nature-based solutions on the other, and assumed or implied health co-benefits on the margins of all this, but instead focusing on the need to expand, align, and find common ground between climate adaptation and mitigation objectives, healthy ecosystems, and the ecosystem services upon which we all depend for our survival, and really understanding how and why they matter to our health, which in the end absolutely isn't negotiable. So a couple of entry points that I want to focus on can be summarized in two key documents. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through the documents, but I will just briefly mention them. One of which is the WHO Manifesto for a Healthy, Green, and Just Recovery, which does contain 6 essential prescriptions and over 80 actionable entry points. And another is a new special report that WHO launched in the lead up to COP26, which is called the Health Argument for Climate Action. So if there is an opportunity, maybe in the chat in a moment, to share the link with you, I'd be happy to do that. And essentially it highlights 10 priorities for safeguarding the health of people and planet that sustains us. Maybe just as a side note, you may be interested to learn that this really does matter to the health community. We are not simply bystanders in this dialogue and in the design of these initiatives. At the same time as the report was launched, as an example, there was also an open letter which was signed by over 2/3 of the global health workforce. So 300 organizations that represent at least 45 million doctors and health professionals that are calling on national leaders and COP26 country delegations and partners and all of you around this table to step up climate action, which inevitably requires innovative climate finance mechanism. So underlying both of these essential reports and recommendations, links which will be shared, is an essential integrated approach that allows us, I think, to bridge climate, biodiversity, and health challenges. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's known as the One Health approach, which is a cross-sectoral approach that seeks to really bring together the human, animal, and ecosystem health, both to ensure policy coherence on the one hand, and to implement more coordinated programs on the ground and across a number of relevant ministries and stakeholders, public, private, to avert and respond to common health risks. And risk is something we all understand across our different sectors, including those that are posed by biodiversity loss, including those that are posed by climate change, the latter of which alone can cause an additional 250,000 deaths every single year between 2030 and 2050 under business as usual scenarios. These aren't necessarily things that we're thinking about when we're developing these financial programs and structures, but probably should be in the back of our minds. Why is this important? Why is One Health valuable? Not because it's a hot new topic. WHO, together with other UN agencies and other strategic partners, recently, also including the IUCN, by the way, have been working to implement One Health for over a decade. But we have a real opportunity here today in this dialogue and throughout the COP to really connect the dots and strengthen One Health by linking across sectors and across our collective climate and sustainable development objectives. And why am I saying this? Why would we do this? Because without going into the breakdown of individual disease burdens, but just giving you a bird's eye view of the global impact of environmental breakdown on human health, we see that one quarter of the global burden of disease is attributable to preventable environmental factors. What does that mean? That means 1 in every 4 deaths is attributable to a preventable environmental factor, notably including climate change, notably including biodiversity loss. So really bringing health at the center of that argument makes sense. And using that integrated approach that links across these different areas is absolutely essential. These links are actually very complex, but they're also an essential entry point to developing innovative governance and finance mechanisms that really cut across the need to transform our food systems, to ensure access to clean air and fresh water, to tackle climate change, to address the full range of non-communicable and infectious diseases. So I'm going to stop there. I'm keeping this intervention brief, but really just before I finish, I'd like to encourage us all into thinking about how we can meaningfully raise that ambition by working across and beyond our respective institutional silos and logos, and with essential sectors outside the environment sector that the finance stakeholders have traditionally worked with. So that's all for now.
Thank you very much, Christina. Fascinating statistic on 1 in every 4 deaths. Something related to environmental factors, something I wasn't aware of. I come from it's the same across the economy. The WEF report recently last year looked at the main impacts of the environment has impacts on 6 out of 10 of the key sectors that we work with. And those, what is great, and having WHO on a panel like this is the range of non-traditional sectors that are now coming in. And I think has been a real thrust of discussions and announcements in Glasgow here so far. So thank you for your interventions. So I'm just going to go around to actually I'm going to start with you, Christina, and go around in a bit of a random order, because you talked a lot about integrated cross sectors and the role of that, and we're looking here a lot about private sector investment. We've sort of heard about the blue bonds, the blueprints, etc. So if we are going to increase our finance that is both equitable and flexible, what is the role of the public sector finance or the public sector in helping mobilize that? No, still, yep, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. So, yeah, I mean, the role of the again, I'm not a finance expert, so please don't take me as such. But I think, I mean, we've addressed this in part in the the health argument for climate action report that we recently launched. And the role of the public sector is essentially acknowledging what these impacts are, what the impacts of climate change, of biodiversity loss, of ecosystem degradation are, what those risks are, and decoupling that essentially from their investments. So ensuring that we're not investing in things that harm our health and harm and harm our future. So investing in prevention, for instance, I think is absolutely essential. If we look at it right now, only 3% of investment is actually focused toward prevention, while 97% is actually focused toward emergency response. So if there's a crucial role there, it's really acknowledging the role and value of investing in prevention, which incidentally is infinitely less costly than emergency response, and being coherent. I think I've used the word coherent, cross-sectoral, and innovative multiple times, because these things really do need to align, and I think that there's a really essential role to be played there. And not forgetting to bring in those non-traditional partners that actually have, you know, we say, it's ironic because, you know, we say health is a non-traditional partner in the face of climate change, but we've been working in this area for decades. We're helping countries to conduct climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessments. We're currently assisting countries in the development and implementation of the health component of national health adaptation plans. We are supporting country projects on climate change and health. We're developing guidance to strengthen the climate resilience of health systems and the climate resilience of healthcare facilities. So we are working in these areas, and we're doing this with the very small amount of budget that is actually focused toward prevention. So the recommendation moving forward is adopting those integrated approaches, making health and other sectors central strategic partners in the fight against climate change and biodiversity loss.
Great. I think, Christina, that's fantastic, and it leads on to my next question that I perhaps pass over to you, but Patrice, is, you know, we quite often work within a cycle of short-term projects. And so what is needed to actually take for community-based adaptation, ecosystem-based adaptation, to achieve our longer-term goals? I think, as Christina put it, we're quite responsive, but are we looking along in the future? So the work that you're doing and around all the different in insurance, etc., how does that guide us on the longer-term path rather than short-term strategies?
I would say that probably, you know, on our side, we have the long-term view, right, in trying to pilot the project, to get the lessons, the understanding, try to develop an economic viable financial model, and eventually to be able to be in a position to offer some economic benefit or returns or savings that can make the project investable. So we come to it with a medium-term development mind frame. I think that it's probably on the investment side, and if you look at impact investors or dedicated investors, they make sure our timeline for investments. But when you look a little bit more to mainstream investors, I think that the short-term view and maybe the quick returns is more a demand on their side rather than something that we are trying to deliver. So, you know, I think that as much as we may try to replicate and scale up, and I think that the dynamism and the speed at which that will happen will increase, because as I was saying, you know, we are showcasing some of the pilot studies, some of the projects that we have pilot. Now they have worked, they are being replicated, they are being scaled up. We continue piloting, testing, developing, scaling. So, you know, it's a process, and I think that eventually, you know, investors will, you know, I would like to see a little bit of a shift in the mindset of some investors in which, you know, they may be willing to face investment with a little bit more of patience and longer term mind frame, and maybe the expectations of a little bit more moderate financial returns, but many other returns across environmental, social, and other benefits. And what I would like to say about the implementation of MBS in adaptation, and one of the issues, you know, we need more expertise, more science. We need to do it faster. We need to do it at a bigger scale. But I think one important issue is the governance mechanism that you put in place to implement those MBS for adaptation. And usually you bring capital from the private and the public sector, you know, DFIs, government, investment banks, NGOs, corporate. You bring actors from very different sectors to work together, financial institutions, corporate, government, NGOs, again, scientists. They come from very different work cultures, geographies, backgrounds. And I think that one needs to focus on what are the governance mechanisms that, while being inclusive, they can be lean and efficient at the same time to deliver that implementation. And, you know, one example for us, which has been very successful, and actually we have worked with EC across quite a few projects in Latin America, and is the establishment of water funds. Water funds are a governance platform for the management of watersheds. And it includes corporate utilities, local governments, agriculture, farmers, and all the stakeholders. So it's about how you can create that governance mechanism to implement the natural investment solutions that are necessary to adapt. We have established more than 40 of those water funds, and we have had requests from partners to establish 300 water funds, which of course is something that we cannot help to put together. So we are establishing a water fund facility to share that governance mechanism and to advise others how to put together and how, you know, we can see the scaling up of MBS for adaptation, sharing governance mechanisms that have worked. Other examples of governance mechanisms could be related to the Belize Blue Bond, in which TNC is working with the stakeholders to help the government to put in place the marine spatial plan. And then we are also establishing a new conservation fund with a governance mechanism that is going to ensure that the annual cash flows that are going to be available for MBS and for adaptation and for many other ocean conservation programs are going to be deployed efficiently. So I think that governance mechanisms bringing together, you know, the very, very diverse set of actors, which I don't think it's replicated in any other economic activity or sector. But, you know, when we talk about climate and nature, it's very important to achieve results.
Great, thanks, Beatrice. I think that's right. Well, it leads into my next question. I'll try not to summarise because you had a very rich, but you did talk, and as Christina did, about the knowledge, the tools, the planning, etc., and then help to shift those investments to where they need to go. So Philippe, I think in there there's a critical range for public funding. I wonder if you have any reflections on what you've heard or any other thoughts.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Chris. First of all, let me underline that I think this discussion is really great because we see two things that are already working. First of all, talking with those different actors from different backgrounds is showing us that we are already leaving our silos. We're not at the end yet, but I think it's a very good start. And looking at the examples, the great examples that I've heard today, also shows me that EBA and also nature-based solutions for adaptation is far beyond this niche topic that we started a couple of years ago, and it has been very successful already. And I was just, I would like to come into your first question, Chris, about the public money, because that's something which is really important for us as a public money fund, and we are of course always discussing what is our role, what can be our role, and what will be our role in the future, because we all know the finance gap is huge, and of course we need to increase public finance, but it will never be enough to fill the gap which exists. So we need to define the gaps where we need to put the public money and make sure that they create the environment to invest the money. Marisa said that investors are looking to invest but don't know how. And I think that is part of our role, should be part of our role, to improve the investment environment for those investors. And then, as Natalie said, reduce the risk for investments by, for example, investing into funds, taking the first loss tier, and make it much easier for private investors to contribute their money. I think this is probably our main role. And of course, as governments, we are also in the position to organize that EBA will be part of our planning instruments, will be part of national planning like national adaptation plans, but also NDCs. And that's of major importance because that will link this bottom-up approach with a top-down approach. And when you bring in the investors there, then you will probably be much more successful. But looking at this podium today, it is really giving me great hope that we are on the right way. And I just got quite a few ideas, and I think that to get away from this short-term approach, we really need to invest in partnerships. Long-during, really ongoing partnerships, and this is why this COP and the events are so important, to bring together the actors who are already doing those really successful things, but we need to connect those examples and the good projects that are already working. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Filippo. And I believe you may be departing at some point soon, but so thank you for your speech and introduction. And whenever you stay for as long as you want and do depart as you need. Natalie, at one stage, Philippe referenced your point on risk. So perhaps you'd like to elaborate on that and the role of partnerships.
Yes, thank you. Actually, yes, I also wanted to talk about that, but also about finding to fill the gaps. What role can the public sectors play in order to fill the gaps that are there to make the impact investors or the more commercial investors, institutional investors, comfortable to get engaged in nature-based solutions, especially for adaptation. And here we spoke about public funding being applied on the level of preparing the projects, and also what we do at the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, public funding being applied on the level of investing in investment funds, in targeted impact funds, taking a first loss position into these funds. This way you can also mobilize impact more commercial investors to invest in the fund if the public sector really buffers the first risk, the first loss. And also we have heard also today from Marisa and TNC the role of the public sector on taking credit, doing credit enhancements on blue bonds, and also on to harness really and to get investors in from pension funds and insurance companies to get involved in investing in nature-based solutions in the coastal zones. This is really shows how the public sector can, on multiple levels, become engaged to scale up the financing for nature-based solutions.
Thanks, Natalie. And yeah, I mean, great. I mean, these are key things that are coming out and hopefully sort of shaping our ways forward and addressing those gaps, reducing risks. And then, as Philippe poured out your point, Marisa, about, you know, we're looking to invest but don't know how to. So perhaps my next question is a little bit abstract in relation, because we're still not wanting to invest now. But how do we scale it up? How do we go from scale? You've got this fantastic bond in Belize. How do we How do we replicate that? How do we move it forward? How do we get to the scale that is needed for 30% of the climate solution of nature-based solutions, or remove the 5% that Ali mentioned is climate change, going towards climate change adaptation? How do we increase that, and how do we mobilize that private investment?
Great question, and I think we've touched on many things, but I think we have to open our aperture and look for any kind of tool in the toolkit. So even just on policy for a second, because that leads to an answer to your question. You know, we talked about credit enhancement, like wrappers using the good faith and credit of a U.S. government or another large sovereign to provide that credit wrapper, which takes certain risk off the table, which allows then large pools of capital to flow, because many of these large capital providers have minimum rating standards, as an example. So for them to direct the capital sometimes where it's needed most in a developing economy on a non-rated or very low-rated country, it's punitive to lend there unless you can enhance that credit rating. So that's the perfect example of you can get to institutional investors if you start asking them, what are the blockages to the capital? Is it credit rating? Is it duration? Is it liquidity? So these are the things that we're systematically going through. And when we're creating our various structures, to say if we can change, or attack each one of those things that are preventing your capital from flowing, then we've done our job. But I also wanted to touch on a few more things, because capital loves to flow where it's efficient, where it believes that you can generate a return and the enabling conditions are there. So another way policymakers, in addition to credit support or taking first loss, is things like subsidy redirection. If policymakers were to direct subsidies away from polluting industries toward green and natural capital, then the private investment community will follow, because what are you doing? You're almost creating whole new industries. Think of maybe a good analog would be electric vehicles. The minute a government says, I'm going to support and fund EV, or I'm going to ban petrol cars, all of a sudden, overnight, you're creating a multi-$100 billion industry, and people want to invest in that. So it's the same sort of phenomenon. So redirection of subsidies could be one. Also, policymakers can invest in some of the new emerging technology, which will support natural capital solutions. So think about something like the incredible sensor technology and geosatellite technology now for agriculture, where you can go down and look to the individual shoot of a plant in a 100,000 hectare farm and determine whether that plant needs more shade or more water. If we invest in those kind of technologies, that creates precision farming, which is infinitely more efficient. Those companies that are performing that way are going to have higher yields and therefore make more money, and also probably use less inputs, meaning their cost structure should go down because they're going to need less pesticides or less water. So they're more profitable. So the investor wants to follow. So there's all of these things that can be done, even with some tweaks at the policy level. But what else can we do? The phenomenon of scaling markets is typically when something's never been done before, it's very hard the first time. You start out small. It takes a really long time. You have to roll up your sleeves and do the hard graft to get the structure done, which is where Seychelles started back in 2014. That was a tiny little transaction of, from memory, it was 15 million or 25 million in total. But a lot of those kinks were worked out in that first transaction. So we use that as the playbook to do the next one. And the next one, might be our deal at 300, but we've learned some lessons there. And then the next one hopefully will be $1 billion, and off you go. So you don't start out at $1 billion because you need to provide confidence for the markets. But when you show that case study, show what works, and then the next time you do it bigger, 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 and then it becomes, a lot of that plumbing becomes something that is now part of the fabric of how these transactions are structured, and investors then have confidence. And the final point I would make is creating a set of standards, because institutional investors don't have huge resources to go and evaluate each deal individually in terms of its conservation merits, the proof points that the capital is really going to make the impact and all of that. So if we can also create a set of commonly adopted standards, that's much easier for the large institutional monies to follow, because they're not having to learn each time as they go. If it's market adopted and it's backed by science and it's backed by the wonderful NGOs who are doing it on the ground that can prove their good work over many decades, but then say this is what good looks like, and good looks like this applied to blue bonds. The blue bond principle work is brilliant, and that's exactly why green bonds have scaled to $1 trillion market today, because there's a set of principles, and we know if issuers are following those principles, they're hitting those basic standards, and then the market's quite confident that they can invest behind that.
Fantastic, Marissa. A range of different options and suite of. I'm just going to pick up on your point on standards, and Christina, perhaps go back to your point for you to elaborate as well, Christina, on you talked about the impact that we can have on health. So how can standards help us understand that and drive that forward as we're looking at financing adaptation strategies?
Yes, sure. Okay. Well, I mean, yes, standards on the one hand can save millions of lives. Just for instance, just as an example, integrating standards that would lead to more sustainable and healthier food systems, because the food systems was used as an example, could, based on WHO guidelines and standards, would save an estimated 5 million lives every year. Ascribing to more stringent air pollution standards by reducing fossil fuels could reduce the number of deaths, which is currently 7 million annual deaths a year, by 80%. So yes, absolutely, standards, guidelines play an absolutely crucial role. But there are also other ways in which in which we can develop more inclusive and comprehensive systems by acknowledging, for instance, that or by supporting more sustainable livelihoods and encouraging practices and investments that not only strengthen the capacity to adapt to climate change but also to mitigate disease risk, including, for example, and I think this example was just used, the removal of perverse economic incentives that are, of course, detrimental to ecosystems. They're terrible for the climate, but they're also detrimental to health and potentially hinder nutrition and livelihoods and so forth. By strengthening, for instance, integrated surveillance and monitoring, and developing early warning systems for adaptation, these are things that require innovative investments as well. Through, for example, an inclusive, iterative, cross-sectoral, I was talking about One Health before, through an inclusive, iterative, cross-sectoral process of co-design. So really having EBA initiatives that genuinely embrace the One Health approach can really allow us to get to some of those root causes of ecosystem degradation and ill health that I was referring to at the very beginning, while also attenuating the impacts of climate change. And how does it do so? It does so by really bringing in those different spheres of expertise together on biodiversity, ecology, epidemiology, public health, so that we can, gain an improved understanding of what the coevolutionary factors of ecosystem alteration, disease emergence, and climate change are. What does that mean? So what are those factors essentially that exacerbate risk? And really taking those and embedding those in our in our guidelines and standards. We can also implement inclusive EBA standards that in ways that enable and enforce the regulatory mechanisms to which we were referring to before, by ensuring that we're aligning and our narrative and ensuring policy coherence and linking up the various sectoral processes so essential to climate change adaptation plans. Another important entry point that hasn't necessarily been elaborated upon much is the need to develop integrated indicators and environmental and social safeguards that are aligned with the Iucn global standards for nature-based solutions on the one hand, but that also meaningfully embed health outcomes in their development, design, and implementation. By also promoting intersectoral structure, governance, and funding mechanisms, and designing policies that can both maximize health, climate, biodiversity co-benefits, but also enable us to assess the potential and inevitable trade-offs that we're going to face in the design of the of sectoral EBA policies. So I think that those are a few tools and entry points that could enable non-traditional sectors to play a more active role and enable us to be a little bit more ambitious and innovative in what we are financing as well.
Great, thanks, Christina. And I think your last point there about non-traditional sectors sort of leads me into the next question. Perhaps I can ask you, Patrice. We've heard a lot of examples around oceans and coastal adaptation and investments, and I wonder, so if we're looking to get that diversity of investments across the different sectors, what do you have any experience, or what would be your thoughts on how do we get sort of into more broader land-based investment flows, which by their nature have perhaps a little bit more complexity in the landscapes than the oceans. Obviously each have their own governance issues, etc. But in a lot of landscapes where I've worked and experienced, there's a complexity of sectors and investment opportunities which then blur the lines for clear investment. So, how do we actually get that diversity?
I think that when one thinks about adaptation, one of the key focuses on ocean conservation and the resilience of island countries to extreme weather events. But I think that there is a lot of work going on adaptation in a terrestrial setting as well, and the development of innovative financing mechanisms in agriculture, water management, forestry, land management that actually are proving successful. Maybe, I would mention in terms of this partnership between private sector and other organizations like DNC, we have in place, we play the conservation advisory role in two significant funds. One of them, the Sustainable Water Impact Fund, the SWIFT, and the other one that was announced a couple of weeks ago with BTG Pactual, the Brazilian financial institution. And basically what we do is to provide the tools, the analysis, the data, the assessments that are going to contribute to those fund managers which are investing in agriculture, in water assets, in forestry, in land assets, to see how they can manage those assets to improve the conservation, the adaptation, the climate mitigation outcomes, alongside the provision of commercial returns to their fund investors. The SWIFT is 1 billion has 1 billion in assets, and obviously it's targeted to large investors. We expect that the partnership with BTG Pactual eventually will raise $2 billion, so that's targeted to institutional investors, and that's bringing together the conservation and adaptation mitigation outcomes of large investment alongside the commercial obligations, of course, of the fund managers and the expectations of investors. So I think that in addition to putting in place these innovative finance mechanisms, there are other mechanisms as well that can help fund managers and asset managers to embed and incorporate conservation and climate and biodiversity considerations into their investments to make them more impactful, and at the same time to deliver their commercial returns, which I think is worth exploring and further scaling up to achieve not only the shift of the money going to natural base for adaptation, but investment already working for adaptation while delivering the commercial returns that they need to.
Yeah, fantastic, Beatrice, and I think, actually you raised it earlier on, and I'd made a note about also that mitigation and other benefits, the returns that we're getting from that. And Natalie, perhaps I can just, as a final panelist question, just to you talked about the blue natural carbon facility, so you're looking for also from the adaptation and mitigation perspectives. So how do you balance the both, and what are the opportunities of future investment into both adaptation and mitigation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So we are lucky when we're working with coastal ecosystems and nature-based solutions in coastal ecosystems that we have multiple benefits. So we have the climate mitigation benefit, the climate adaptation benefit, we have biodiversity benefits, and other sustainable development co-benefits. And have been working over the past 3 years a lot with Iucn, Blue Natural Capital Facility, on mangrove restoration, coastal ecosystem restoration. And so, of course, in every project that we are looking at, we are trying to see what are revenue streams that we can derive from the various benefits as well. So adaptation benefits have a clear cost saving, future cost saving for the local communities, for the local governments, for the national governments as well. So how do you bring forward the value of this future cost savings is tricky. And here we're of course looking at what TNC is doing, the work of TNC in the resilience credit area, which is very interesting, and looking forward to see how you apply it over the 12 projects that you have said earlier. And we of course, and that's the tricky part, we see that these ecosystem investments can generate cost savings in the future. We cannot determine them exactly now. We have seen investment models around against cost savings already being very common in the area of energy efficiency services, where you can really determine what are my energy cost savings in the future. Based on that determined cost saving, you can really build around an investment model around that. But here, on the level of nature-based solutions for coastal climate adaptations, we cannot really know exactly what will be the cost saving in the future. We know it will be important. So here, the work, I think, what has been mentioned earlier also in determining the cost efficiency of nature-based solutions is very important, showing how can we save the cost in the future, really to make the climate adaptation benefit bankable on one side. Second, we have of course the climate mitigation benefit of many coastal ecosystems like mangroves. They absorb 4 times more carbon than terrestrial forests. Of course, we are looking into how to take advantage of this mitigation benefit, because for the mitigation benefits we have clear international markets for carbon credits, for mitigation offsets. We can sell them, we can also do basically impact payment models around them. And this really, the multiple benefits that we see from coastal and from nature-based solution really help us design different revenue streams around this, and to combine them in one project, and also combine them when we are speaking out to investors.
Thanks very much, Natalie. And yeah, I think as you, one of the things I was noting down about how everyone's referenced the multiple benefits of nature-based solutions and different adaptation strategies, but also the challenges then to assess all of those benefits, and to not only from a financial investment return, but from a broader whether it's social or environmental returns as well. So I would just like to give the opportunity for anyone who's attended for any questions from the floor before I will hand over to Angela. Well, I'll ask the panelists for a quick reflection, and then before handing over to Angela for a closing remarks. So do we have any questions from the floor? Silence is golden. There's only shakings of the head. So perhaps we could just go around the panel and just give a quick reflection on what you've heard. So perhaps Marissa, I could start with you just for a 1 minute of reflections on some of what the opportunities and challenges that you've heard around mobilizing finance.
Well, I think most importantly, it leaves me optimistic that we've got such a great deal of energy and intellect that is being applied to what I think previously would have been seemingly intractable problems. And slowly, we're chipping away at each of those hurdles. And then when we have breakthroughs, then it's this idea that you take that and then you run with it and you scale it. And then that really makes a material difference on people, planet, and human health. And our very existence. So I think that's maybe my big reflection of the day, is that when you have a lot of energy, I think we're all guided by the same mission, even though we come at it from a different perspective. Those perspectives actually lend probably some solutions which might be hidden if we were just doing it in our own silos. And I think that is the new thing in this whole ecosystem of committed financiers and committed conservationists that rather than operating in those lanes where in the past we did our thing over here and someone did their thing over there, by combining our expertise, sparks fly. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Marissa, and thank you for your wonderful contributions. Beatrice, perhaps I can go to you next.
I would just reinforce what Marisa said, and to have that sense of hope that a lot is happening, and there is much more that is going to happen actually, and maybe you have to remember everyone in the context of the belief blue bond that we were talking to them. What are the key ingredients that have made the transaction successful? And I would say the government commitment to conservation, the successful partnerships across the government financial sector, NGOs, development finance institutions, bringing private and public capital together in the most effective way, and then to put in place governance mechanisms that are going to ensure that the cash flows that are being created for conservation are going to have an impact. And there are targets, and then we can prove that that is going to be the case. So I think those 4 components probably are key ingredients that any MBS for adaptation innovative financing mechanism will require to succeed.
Great, and thank you, and likewise, and congratulations on your work. I think some of the work that you mentioned earlier is fantastic and relates to that optimism that Marissa was talking about. And Natalie, perhaps I could have your reflections, trying to break it up between video and presence.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I don't want to summarize what we have already said during the past hour and a half, but really I want to pick up what also Beatrice just mentioned, from showing that the cash flows that we're mobilizing also from the investment community really have the impacts that we are expecting, because these investors, be it investors in impact funds, be it investors of a blue bond or a sustainability bond with a blue focus, really want to see the impacts in the end of the row. So what we really, our to-do list when we come out of this conference, when we get back to our desk, is really to show that the nature-based solutions can be integrated into the different standards that are developing currently in the area of sustainable finance, so that the impacts are visible and the investors understand how they fit into the standards, for them also to be able to gather the internal support in their institutions to invest in these instruments. I mean, we have the ICMA, International Capital Markets Association, having the green bond standards, the sustainability bond standards, which have now dedicated standards for impact reporting. We have the IFC, operating principles for impact reporting. We have the different taxonomies that are developing, the EU sustainable finance taxonomy with climate adaptation as a key environmental goal area, and within that we also see wetlands being integrated, and we attached to that we also have guidelines on how to measure the impacts of investments that are financed through the different taxonomies. So really get nature-based solution into the tools that the sustainable finance market is working with. I think that's really key, and it's what also Marisa mentioned early on. We have to speak to the needs of these investors, and we can speak to the needs of these investors through these tools and help work further to develop these tools to reflect also standards like the Iucn nature-based solution global standards, so that we can find a common ground.
Great, thank you very much, Natalie, and thanks for your long-term collaboration with Iucn as well as the short-term as being a panelist. And then, Christina, perhaps I can leave the final word with you from the panelist perspective.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think the panelists that preceded me have summarized it so beautifully and so well. And if I have a few final words to say, it would be that we really have to be bold and purposeful in our actions and investments to catalyze transformational change, true transformational change. And catalyzing that change mean that we're collectively aiming for, first and foremost, calls for a renewed focus on prevention. I do want to reiterate that once again, of health risks associated with climate change and ecosystem breakdown. It calls for collaboration, coherence, and innovation. I'm really going to just focus on that innovation component. Innovation how, innovation where, innovation by catalyzing investment in new, greener, and cleaner technologies, and through a decarbonization of our economy in ways that support health co-benefits, innovation in the creation and strengthening of institutions that currently still work in our respective institutional silos. Innovation by moving beyond the tendency to compartmentalize the protection of biodiversity and ecosystems from the impacts of climate change and making those separate from our goal of safeguarding human health and well-being. We've already seen what the consequences of that are. Innovation in how we develop safeguards, for instance, through the removal of perverse incentives to maximize those co-benefits with a view to jointly transforming, for instance, our food systems, our energy systems, our climate and health systems by embedding integrated approaches such as One Health in ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions, by transforming our traditional ways of thinking and doing business in ways that actually meaningfully catalyze behavior change through essentially what is a whole of government, whole of society approach, bringing in the public and the private by catalyzing calls for more coordinated and coherent ways of developing policies, whether it be environment, agriculture, fishery, forestry, urban planning, or and health, and by creating new and innovative and again, you know, innovation by creating new and innovative ways of financing through blended finance, by harnessing the potential of public-private partnerships, microfinance, green and blue bonds, and the numerous other financial instruments that were addressed today. And through innovation in the design, monitoring, and implementation of nature-based solution projects, so as to bridge across the full range of environmental, social, and economic determinants, and essentially working outside of our respective comfort zones and embracing new modes of collaboration to get there.
Great.
So,
thanks.
thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to working with all of you toward this transformational change.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you to all the panelists. It's been fascinating, a great range of examples, a great range of initiatives, and a lot of urgency and boldness behind there. Now I would like for the closing remarks to introduce Angela Andrade Perez, who will provide the closing remarks. Angela is the chair of the Iucn Commission on Ecosystem Management and has been working with Iucn on the Commission for over 18 years with 25 years experience in ecosystem management. So welcome, Angela.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris, and for the opportunity to say some final words. And also today we learned a lot of new ideas, innovative ideas on how to scale up and promote ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation and mitigation. As you all know, this is a road that started 13 years ago when a small group of organizations under the leadership of Iucn decided to introduce this new approach to address climate change impacts and to promote human well-being and biodiversity conservation. And since then, as you know, the concept of ecosystem-based adaptation was adopted by the CBD, and in those days it was almost impossible to use the same language in both conventions. So that's something very important that we are learning after 12, 13 years, and thanks to the work of the FIBA group that we started in Lima in 2016 or 15, I don't remember anymore. But it's incredible to see how organizations like Iucn, that was here today, presented the work that was done, as well as many countries. So I don't want to repeat what was said, but I think what is important to keep in mind is that the climate and the biodiversity crisis are completely interdependent. Christina also mentioned the health component that is very much linked to the biodiversity and the climate crisis. But I want to recall also that this race is extremely linked to the need to reduce emissions. So because this is something that cannot really be successful if we don't stop the emissions, and because the ecosystems can be resilient at a certain point. And when we started the discussion on EBA, we all agreed that the limit could be 1.5 degrees. We really don't know what will happen when the ecosystems are threatened under new circumstances, more than 1.5 degrees or even more. So perhaps in that moment the risks will be even higher from what we have now. So the opportunities that we have are not really so much. The window is being reduced every year. So this is a call to really continue innovating and improving not just the finance. There were some ideas that I think are extremely important that are related to the governance systems. I think that's extremely necessary. And also we heard that many countries are including ecosystem-based approaches as well as nature-based solutions in the NDCs and in the 2050 strategies. And that is one of the main political outcomes that we can have, because that's the only way, and nature is our main asset to continue our life in this planet. So I think EBA is still valid, but I think that we really need to increase our work. It's not just scale up, but it has to be included in all sectors. There were some experiences that were presented, but it's the only way to survive, I think. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And from Iucn and the Commission on Ecosystem Management, EBA and nature-based solutions are at the core and of our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, not only for your words, but also for your leadership on EBA and nature-based solutions in Iucn and globally. It's fantastic to get us where we are today. So I'd just like to wrap up now. I've got a pile of notes in front of me for a wrap-up speech, which I'm not going to use because it's just the whole broad context of what everyone said about talking about the funding gaps, the multiple benefits, the role that public finance has in supporting private finance, the opportunity. But I think the technology, the knowledge, the tools, the innovation. But I think the key words that all the panelists used towards the end was urgency, boldness, optimism, and innovation, and making sure that we're working together, not only in partnership but across all sectors. And so I think if we can leave with that message and get that message transferred over the next few days as we go through these discussions on EBA, making sure we will be in an even better place than we are to really achieve that scaling up that is necessary to move us from the minimal point of financing that Ali mentioned right at the beginning. So I'd like to thank you, Angela, for your contributions, and Felipe, who's now left for the speeches, and the Koreans for hosting this event and the introductions. But most also, I'd like to thank the panelists for your contributions, not only today but also much more broadly. And I look around, and we're supposed to be Zoom experts, but now we've been thrown into this world of Zoom and non-Zoom. So it's a new skill that we're all learning. So thank you all very much. for your participation, and hopefully one day we'll meet you all in person as well. So on that words, I'd like to say thank you and close this event. Thank you.